Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Hello there. Welcome back, everybody.
Thanks for joining us, being part of this family. Make sure you're subscribed with the little bell clicked on both channels. Each one does have unique videos. We want to thank William Scott.
Yes.
William's been part of the channel for a long time, and he is a Patreon supporter, and he's one of our archangels over there on Patreon. So we truly appreciate him, and also everybody that is supporting us over on Ko-Fi. Now, we had shown this picture before, and we said we were going to get into it a little bit more in a future video. Well, this is that video. And so you see the Seattle Music Store, you see these cars. It looks like it was decades ago, and we see what looks to be a city underneath Seattle.
You know, what is up with that? What is up with that? And the technology, look at it. The technology, the way they build, the bricks they use. It doesn't look like it's some ancient thing, but boy, that's odd. They built that right above that. And how long ago was it?
It wasn't too long ago. At least that's the official explanation. Now, the thing that I think we want to get across in this video is some things we do have some historical evidence for, and yet they might still kind of perplex us. They might surprise us, and maybe still there's not the entire picture there. But yeah, gosh, this is just fascinating to look at. There is a city beneath Seattle. As you see, underground Seattle, city beneath a city. Well, gosh, our history is full of things that will perplex. As you look here, this just looks like they're laying pipe, sewers, I guess, when a town is building up. Oh gosh, all those old houses, they look a lot like where I was growing up as a kid, as we had so many houses that were from turn of the century, houses built 1910, 1900 something, even 1890s, and some that were much older. I, again, grew up in Connecticut, and we had a structure that was called Burr Mansion. It was named after Aaron Burr, who was, actually somebody that was in a famous duel with a previous president and actually ran for president himself. And it was because of his particular election that we ended up getting the whole electoral college system put into place instead of the popular vote. But, I'm digressing. That house was gorgeous, and it was several hundred years old. It goes back to colonial times. Absolutely beautiful structure. And yet, we find ourselves wondering what's underneath our feet when we start going into that whole idea of Tartaria and past civilizations, and we look to Turkey, and we see Derinkenyu. And we realize that there's structures that go at least 8 to 10 levels deep, as far as, just imagine a 10-story building buried underneath your feet that could inhabit tens of thousands of people. This is what we find all around the world. Now, as you're going to see when we look at Seattle, this actually turned into a tourist attraction type thing. As you look here, again, this is Seattle, I would guess 1900-ish maybe. We see telephone poles, right, or telegraph, right? Oh, wait a minute, there's one of those domes, isn't there?
Curious.
That is a dome, and look at these cross. Well, maybe there's nothing. There's a lot of electrical wires there. But still, we did have certain technologies. We had telephones. We had even moving pictures prior to 1900. First motion picture, they tell us, was like around 1895, and that's a very interesting thing in and of itself. So we see, the early structures in Seattle, and we see there was a fire back in 1889. Seattle fires started here on June 6, 1889. Well, that fire got pretty big, and it wiped out whole sections of what was built. As you can see, the rubble and the rubbish after. And when we look at today, we see that they decided to build straight up on top of the old. And in fact, a lot of the old is just completely perfectly preserved, anywhere from 12 to 20 feet below the current surface. So people take tours through this area and they can see old storefronts that were above ground. Now they're 12 to 20 feet below ground. I don't know. It would make me a little nervous to go down there, just, wondering about earthquakes and everything too. What if we get the big one in Cascadia?
Right. That's something that you're just always, well, I'm always thinking about whenever I'm under a bridge or going underneath somewhere. But boy, oh boy, there's a lot of interesting energies down there, I tell you that.
What do you see and feel?
There's still a lot of beings walking through. There must have been some type of emotional, I got to wonder with the fire and everything, was there people lost, or is there just a lot of emotional attachment? So it's a sea of emotions down there, like people leaving behind thought clouds or even part of themselves.
As you see, a line of people going on a tour. Well, history tells us they don't give us any victims of the fire. Now, that sounds curious, because I did read a couple of accounts of this, and one was making mention that they didn't know if they just didn't keep track, but that sounds really weird.
Yeah,
not keeping track of the victims of the fire, or was it simply a miracle? As you can see, this is a pretty big area that nobody was killed in this fire. It feels off. There's something that feels a little bit off as we see these structures. So, Seattle Underground. The remains of the old city that was left abandoned, left in ruins until the 1950s. If anybody has a chance to see the interconnecting tunnels of the world-famous Seattle Underground, definitely don't miss the opportunity. It's extraordinary, and the history is just as fascinating. Seattle Underground hides the remnants of the old city under the streets of Pioneer Square neighborhood. There is an entire network of subterranean hallways, corridors, and basements where the city of Seattle was born. And there, the ruins of shops, hotels, houses can still be seen standing. Over the recent decades, these spaces have become a popular attraction and a history museum of Seattle's early days. So as you see, the facade here was at street level in the mid-1800s. Interesting, is it not? It's like caught in time. As you see, mid-19th century, these structures were on ground level. All the buildings were made of wood. However, most of them were destroyed by the Great Seattle Fire on June 6, 1889. That day, sometime after 2:30 in the afternoon, a cabinet maker and employee in Victor Claremont's woodworking shop of the name of Jonathan Edward Black accidentally forgot the glue that he was heating over a gasoline fire. The glue boiled over, caught fire, easily spreading to the floor covered in turpentine and wooden chips. In the ensuing chaos, he tried to extinguish the fire with water, which made it even worse because the water thinned the turpentine and spread the fire even more. And everyone inside got to get out of the building in the nick of time, but by the time the fire department came to the scene, the fire was out of control. The abundance of smoke made it impossible for the firemen to trace the source of the fire. On top of that, precisely that day, the fire chief happened to be out of town, and the volunteers that came to the scene made the mistake of using too many hoses at once. This led to water pressure to drop completely. The fire caused for the Dietz and Mayer liquor store to explode. Then it spread to the Crystal Palace Saloon and the Opera House Saloon. Because of the huge amounts of alcohol, very soon the entire block from Madison to Marion was on fire. The fire kept building building and burning until 3 a.m., destroying anything in its path, and when it was finally extinguished, the damage done was massive. Over 25 blocks were destroyed. More than 5,000 people, they're missing a digit there, lost their jobs and livelihoods. However, apparently no one had died because there's no known statistics on that. The losses were estimated to be over 8 million. Almost all the town center was annihilated. After the event, the city leaders gathered to discuss what the next steps would be. They come to two crucial decisions that paved the way for Seattle's future. First, all new buildings must be built of stone and brick in order to prevent this kind of disaster from happening. And second, it was decided for the streets to be raised 22 feet higher than the original grade. That's a lot. As the new street level was slowly coming into its place, landlords and merchants knew that eventually the ground floor would end up underground. After the new sidewalks were completed, many of them moved their businesses to the new ground floor. Still, some merchants who owned the buildings that survived the fire continued carrying on their business on the lower floors. As you see, the concrete floor of a former meat market, originally at the level of a wooden platform on the left, but sank over time because of decomposing sawdust fill. Interesting. Something feels really odd, doesn't it? A former bank seen on Bill Spidle's underground tour. The vault door is in the background on the right. In 1907, when fears of the bubonic plague was immense, the city condemned the underground floors. Many of the basements were evacuated, left to rot and deteriorate, or were just used as storage space. However, a small portion of underground structure continued to function and was used as flop houses for the homeless, and some buildings were turned into speakeasies, opium dens, and gaming establishments. Subterranean literally became the underground of the city. Place of junkies, gambling addicts, and all kinds of illegal activities remained in this state, abandoned from the outside world to the 1950s, when the story of how the Seattle Underground was saved begins. It all starts with a man by the name of Bill Spidle, a local citizen, historian, and columnist for the Seattle Times. He realized there may be a profit in the preservation of the subterranean ruins of Seattle. In 1965, he established the Bill Spidle's Underground Tour and began make tours for visitors who were curious to see the abandoned ruins underneath Pioneer Square, with a mutual agreement of the building owners, who he paid rent to for the privilege. Passing years saw the underground structures completely refurbished and preserved in their authentic form, and the place was steadily becoming more and more popular and appealing for visitors. And to this day, his underground tour remains hugely popular with tourists. Very, very curious feel to all this. Something feels like it's missing, doesn't it?
You know, it just explains a lot about what I'm feeling when we look at the pictures, and I feel the energy. There is such a huge, deep level of sorrow and despair. And then we talk about some of the people that took over, you know, that ran their own little businesses on the side there. It makes a lot of sense. And just because I don't see beings standing there in the picture doesn't mean they're not there, because when you have this level of emotion, you're going to have something coming in to suck off that emotion and then energize and strengthen itself. So there's things down there. You're feeling right.
Yeah, as you see, this one here is quoting all the streets being raised about 12 feet up to 30 feet in some really low-lying spots. So, you know, that's curious. A city on top of a city. And then, of course, the seedy underbelly there. And now a tourist trap. So, yeah, I mean, this gives you one explanation for, you know, this is just one particular location, one particular explanation for something like this that gets us to say what's going on here. So, you know, in this case, a fire led to this. But is there anything more going on as well? I don't know. What do you guys know? What do you guys know? What do you feel? What do you think about this?
There's a lot of information that can be pulled out of this information.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to take a look at some other particular areas to go deeper into that we know there is some historical basis for why, things are buried underneath our feet.
There's, a lot of information that we're just not being told.
Absolutely. So again, guys, thanks for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. As always, much love. Look forward to your ideas as well. Share with us what you want to go deeper into. God bless and namaste.
Namaste.